There was a bigger, deadlier fire on the same day as the Great Chicago Fire. It's mostly forgotten now. This presentation is a review of the book Firestorm at Peshtigo by Denise Guess and William Lutz. I'm Gene Madden. The NWCG defines a firestorm as a violent convection caused by a large continuous area of intense fire, often characterized by destructively violent surface indrafts near and beyond the perimeter, sometimes with tornado-like fire whirls. On October 8, 1871, the entire upper Midwest experienced numerous large fires. Chicago, Peshtigo, and all across Michigan had large, deadly fires, all from the same set of circumstances. After the Civil War, the country turned to the resource-rich upper Midwest, thick with its virgin forests and fertile soil, to help the country rebound its economy and the war-ravaged South with the raw products it required. This, of course, attracted loggers, farmers, and a variety of new businesses and entrepreneurs. Opening up the way were railroads, and to tell the story, newspapers. Railroads were given broad right-of-way access across the frontier, oftentimes without regard to the environment, Native American treaties and lands, or the stewardship responsibilities. Just like today, there were the rich, the middle class, and the workers who performed the thankless toil, who worked long, hard hours, day and night. They came from everywhere: tycoons from the East Coast, lumbermen who had clear-cutted the forests of the Northeast, and immigrants who had fled their home country because of war, famine, or promise of a new beginning in a land of honey. They were hard-working, hard-fighting men and women who came to this sugar bush country to make a new life and perhaps become rich. Maybe because so many of them were new, they missed or ignored some important signs of impending trouble ahead. There was the lack of rainfall and drought-like conditions, the warm temperatures, which cured the forest fuels, the increased fuel loading in developed areas from sawmill and logging operations, the number of frequent wildfire starts and the difficulty in suppressing them, as well as the rekindling of these fires once they got going. The unreliable weather reports from the Weather Service or the Army Signal Service, and the media itself was rather biased and just saw things through rose-colored glasses. Today, we have satellites orbiting 200 miles overhead to monitor our weather, but in 1871 they didn't have any of these technologies to watch. All they had was the much maligned fledgling U.S. Army Signal Service and spotty newspaper weather reports. A blow-up is a sudden increase in fire line intensity or its rate of spread. They're often accompanied by violent convection and can have characteristics of a firestorm. Around 8 p.m. on October 8, 1871, this is what many of the residents saw as they looked to the hilltops surrounding them. A sudden roar made heads turn, and in any direction as the loggers, farmers, and shopkeepers looked, also fire, smoke, and ash and embers flying every place. With very few places to go to safety, many fled into the chilly waters of the Peshtigo River, fighting to find a place to stand alongside hundreds of others, and their animals too. Even in the safety of the river, many received burns to their hands, heads, and arms as a testimony to the intensity of this fire. Extreme fire behavior implies a high rate of spread, prolific crowning and or spotting, a presence of fire whirls, strong convection columns, and the predictability of these fires is often very difficult. Frequently, they influence their own fire environment and behave quite erratically and dangerously. The response from the outside world was slow. After all, the country was only just learning about the Great Chicago Fire. Peshtigo's only telephone line was down. Both roads and railroads were blocked with debris and trees had fallen. From the firestorm, even the shipping lanes across the lake were slow because of the dense smoke and dangerous floating debris. The first responders to arrive were beyond disbelief with what they found. A town, later to find 16 others, were all gone, as were most of the residents. The governor's wife, upon hearing of the tragedy, 2 days later, immediately sent a railroad car of supplies to aid the town. The Peshtigo fire consumed approximately 1.5 million acres of land, and though the exact number of lives lost is unknown, it could be as high as 2,500. The fire burned right to the shoreline of Lake Michigan and then continued to burn several more days until it rained and the fire finally went out. Some of the other interesting fire facts include that Peshtigo did not have a fire department itself. However, it did own a horse-drawn steamer pumper. Not that that would have done much good in 60-mile-an-hour plus winds. Also, many years later, during the Second World War, Allied researchers came and they studied what was called the Peshtigo paradigm to study what occurred there to enhance the firebombing of enemy cities in the European and Pacific theaters. There were a number of contributing factors to this firestorm. Certainly the weather with its drought-like conditions, warm temperatures and wind events aided the drying of fuels and fed the fires with oxygen and pushed it across the land. The logging practices of the time with pile burning of timber and slash debris, as well as the farming practices of slash and burn to clear the lands. Likewise, the railroads with their right-of-way practices of clearing the debris and burning it. Also, many of the railroads spit out sparks along the right-of-ways, and the fires along those tracks went untouched. Firestorm at Peshtigo by Guess and Lutz is an extraordinary narrative slice of American history that should appeal to a wide audience. History buffs, wildland fire and forest managers, sociologists and emergency managers alike will find this story almost too unbelievable, yet it is true. The author's accounting is based upon extensive research of the fire and the area. The authors, both academics at Rutgers University, do a worthy job in identifying and discussing the political and historical content for today's reader. Their conclusions regarding fire behavior should provoke a healthy discussion for students of wildland fire. My references include